Look at this trading floor. In June 2026, SpaceX completed the largest public offering in history, raising $85.7 billion and commanding a $2 trillion valuation. Yet less than 2 decades before this financial milestone, the exact same company was widely dismissed as a billionaire's expensive hobby, teetering on the edge of total bankruptcy. To understand how they got here, we have to rewind to 2002. At that time, spaceflight was an exclusive, heavily guarded club. The entire industry was controlled by national governments and legacy aerospace contractors like Boeing and Lockheed. This Apollo moon landing photograph captures a historical peak. But following those early achievements, human progress in space stalled for decades. We stopped. The industry had settled into a rigid economic reality. Rockets were painstakingly custom-built. They were extraordinarily expensive and treated as completely disposable. Breaking into this market as a startup required declaring war on a decades-old bureaucracy, one that treated the astronomical cost of spaceflight as an unchangeable law of physics. Elon Musk, fresh off selling PayPal, became obsessed with a radical question. Why had humanity stopped pushing outward to become a spacefaring civilization? He started calculating the actual costs of rocketry and made a startling discovery. The raw materials, the aluminum, titanium, and carbon fiber, were relatively cheap. The massive price tags came from a bloated, sprawling supply chain of legacy subcontractors. SpaceX's countermeasure was vertical integration. They decided to bring the manufacturing, the engine building, and the software engineering entirely under one roof. This animated flowchart shows how that works in practice. The sprawling, multi-tiered web of traditional aerospace contractors shrinks into a single, highly efficient in-house production loop, drastically cutting costs and development time. With the manufacturing consolidated, they applied a second controversial method: rapid iteration. Legacy aerospace firms spent years trying to perfect designs on paper because they feared public failure. SpaceX chose to build, test, and actively blow things up to gather real-world data quickly, applying the fast-paced, software-style iteration of Silicon Valley to the unforgiving physics of rocket science, put the young company on a very expensive, highly explosive collision course with reality. The brutal consequence of testing in the real world became obvious almost immediately. The first 3 launches of their Falcon 1 rocket end in complete explosive failure. You can see the toll those failures took on this chart. With each unsuccessful launch, hardware was obliterated and the company's capital reserves burned away, dropping violently lower with every attempt. By late 2008, the company hit an extinction event. They were completely out of money, the global financial crisis was raging, and they had exactly enough salvaged parts and resources for one final launch. If Launch 4 failed, the company would fold, and the legacy giants would be proven right. Space was too hard for startups. On September 28, 2008, that 4th rocket reached orbit. This image marks the first time a privately funded company launched a liquid-fueled rocket into space. That single success secured survival. NASA stepped in with a major cargo contract, providing the crucial validation SpaceX needed to stop playing defense and finally go on the offensive. With revenue secured, the team scaled up to the Falcon 9 and aimed squarely at the most glaring flaw in aerospace: disposable rockets. For decades, launching a payload meant throwing the rocket into the ocean afterward. It was the economic equivalent of flying a Boeing 747 and then completely scrapping the airplane. SpaceX proposed landing the booster backwards so they could fly it again. They applied their rapid iteration methodology to this new problem. They tried to land, they crashed, and they exploded in highly public, widely mocked spectacles. But in December 2015, a Falcon 9 booster came down through the atmosphere and touched down perfectly intact. This comparative chart reveals the math behind the victory. When you don't have to build a new vehicle from scratch every time, the massive price of a disposable launch shrinks to the marginal cost of fuel and refurbishment. By solving reusability, SpaceX bypassed the need to simply build a slightly cheaper rocket. They destroyed the economic moat of every legacy competitor on Earth. SpaceX then took that cheap, reusable rockets and pointed them at a completely different business model, a global satellite internet network called Starlink. Instead of waiting around for other companies to buy space on their rockets, SpaceX simply began launching their own hardware, shifting from a transport service into a telecommunications provider with millions of paying subscribers. This loop illustrates the resulting economic engine. In-house rockets deploy in-house satellites. Those satellites generate recurring internet subscription revenue. That revenue flows directly back into building more advanced rockets. That capital feeds directly into their next phase, Starship. The largest rocket system ever built proves that despite dominating the commercial launch market, their sights remain fixed on deep space exploration and Mars. By layering Starlink on top of cheap launches, SpaceX grew from an underdog transport service into an inescapable, self-funding infrastructure monopoly. And this brings us back to 2026. The $2 trillion valuation represents the market's final verdict on 24 years of vertical integration and aggressive, rapid iteration. The same legacy aerospace companies that spent years laughing at the idea of reusable rockets are now scrambling to retool their entire fleets to copy the SpaceX model. It took incredible audacity to look at the entrenched military-industrial complex with a handful of engineers and a dwindling bank account and decide to compete. SpaceX won because their true advantage was never capital, and it was certainly never experience. It was the willingness to risk extinction to prove that the impossible was just an engineering problem waiting to be solved.